Okay, I'm just gonna kind of talk through my process. I'm gonna go ahead and just talk through my process of how I go about making stamps and just some of the things that I find helpful. I've used lots of different types of paper for transferring and different methods of transferring. This one's really easy. This is just a graphite transfer. I use tracing paper, so for my drawings, I'll draw them on tracing paper. You can erase pretty easily on tracing paper, so if you make mistakes with your drawings, that's not a big deal. And the reason I use this is because I get better transfers with the tracing paper. It's like the graphite sits kind of on top of the paper rather than kind of sinking into it like it does with drawing paper. Drawing paper, I don't know, I think it has more tooth, so it kind of goes down into the tooth of the paper a little bit more. So tracing paper works really well for graphite transfers, but you can use any paper. So what you can do is if you're doing a transfer, okay, and I try and use as much of my piece of my carving block as possible. So I try and place it in a spot that's going to work well and I can end up using a lot more. So I place it close to the edge. I don't want it right on the edge, and I'll explain that here too. Okay, so that's all you have to do. You can use something else, like if you've got a big drawing that you want to transfer on, you can use something like this. This is just a little handle that came with a door that I installed in my house that I didn't need because I bought other handles. But you could use something like this. You could use a spoon. As you saw, I just used the backside of my nail and just like that. And for small drawings, that works just fine. You don't have to carve on a cutting board, but I do, because sometimes I'll do things like this, where I cut it out and I can get rid of that extra piece. And I save all my scraps as much as I can. Unless they're tiny little shavings, I'd keep it. This knife is, everybody asks me like what I like to use. This is a Fisker's just craft knife. This whole handle is rubberized, so it's nice and soft and comfortable. It just uses number 11 blades, and I think these are Nick Pro blades I got on Amazon. They're just some cheap craft blades, so nothing special really, but that's what I use. And then when I start actually carving, I try and keep my knife fairly still and this hand fairly still, and I try and do all the moving with my opposite hand. So since I'm right-handed, I move the block with my left hand typically, and I'll move this hand just slightly, but it really stays kind of at like a 45-degree angle-ish. Not exactly, but close. So I like to start kind of at the inside, and you can break down these bigger pieces if you want to into smaller shapes. That's not a bad thing. And what I'm doing now is I'm just going to go right around the outside edge of my pencil lines, and I like to start inside, and if it's a bigger area, I insert more of the blade into it so you can get a deeper cut. And I'm just trying to keep the edge of the blade on the inside of that pencil line, and that's how I do this. So I'm just gonna keep going here. Now where it's a little bit closer, you can pull the blade out because you won't need to cut as deep for those lines to meet on the inside. So think about the fact that you're carving into it and you want your lines to meet on the inside, okay? The thumb is a little bit funky too. So I might just kind of change that as I go. And you can see if you cut it well, it should pull up pretty easily. Now, in some spots like this, maybe I didn't cut deep enough. It's not wanting to come up. What I can do is I can come here to the center and just kind of carve like in towards that edge, okay? Like so. Okay. And then that should release like that. And now what I can do is I can carve this little inside piece out of here. Like that. Okay. And then I just go to all the inside pieces first. That's what I do. There's not really a right or wrong way, but I start with the inside pieces and I go to what's easier. I'm sorry if this video is a little bit shaky too. %90 of the time too, probably more than that, I'm using just a regular craft knife, and usually it's this one. Sometimes I use just an X-Acto brand knife as well if I forget this one or I leave it at one place or another. I've got a couple different knives on hand that I use, but this is kind of my go-to knife. And I know a lot of people like to use gouges, like carving gouges like these, and they have another name too. Some of them are more of a V shape. This one's a U shape. That one's a V shape tool. I don't use those real often. I will use them every once in a while if I'm doing some more like artistic type of lines, like if I'm trying to show value or something in a carving. These are pretty easy. You would think like these little tiny details are fairly hard. As long as you just kind of keep your blade inside that space, you're good to go. It's not as hard as you think. Okay, so I'm just going to keep kind of going here. And as you get more comfortable with this method, you find that you can go quicker and quicker with it. Okay, I've been doing this, I've been carving stamps for about a year, but this method probably about, I don't know, a little bit less than a year, but for me, I find that it's works really well. I like it better than using a gouge personally. I just feel like I have more control over my lines and I can get better details for me. See that? Keep going here. And if you need to take a little break, you can. You don't have to keep your blade in the block the entire time. You can pull it out. It's not going to hurt anything. See that? Sometimes it's really hard. You can do it to where you keep your blade in the block the entire time, but sometimes it's just really hard for that to work. So just kind of do what's comfortable for you. A little piece there I gotta get out. There we go. Sometimes they're a little bit stubborn. There's another one. And if it's a really small space like that, you can do it in sections, kind of like I did. I did 1, 2, 3 sections. You don't have to pull it all out as one piece. Sometimes that's easier, just breaking it down a little bit. Okay, 2 more pieces and then we'll cut around the outside edge. Oops, I guess I need to cut the bottom. That would help. There we go. Okay, and then the outside edge, now that I've got the inside carved, I do the outside edge again, just at a 45-degree angle. I'm not really changing anything. I'm still moving the block with my left hand, and I'm keeping my right hand fairly still. I don't change my blade angle much. I might just change it just a little bit here and there, but for the most part I keep it fairly still. I'm just tracing right around the edge of my lines like this. Now be careful when you go around those edges and your fingers are kind of right there. And now what I'm thinking about is I've got a cut going down that way, so I need a cut going the opposite way around the outside edge. So I'm going to come right here like this. And if it goes off the edge, that's okay. This block too is pretty easy to cut, and this is my favorite. I've tried several different types of blocks. This is the Speedball Speedy Carve, and it's my favorite kind of block to carve. I've tried some of the Chinese blocks that are like white, and some that are like the sandwich style, where it's got like 2 colors sandwiched together. Those are okay. They're a little bit more stiff. I tend to prefer these better. Okay, so then once I have my outside done, then what I'll do is I'll go around and trim up the outside of my block. And what you can do to make sure you keep things strong is if you keep some of those edges, like think about putting a box around it. Okay, so if I were to take from that edge to that edge, okay, I'd kind of make a straight line. So like I got a straight line here, I'm gonna make one here and then one over here too. And then what you can do is you can take your knife kind of flat. Just be careful. You want to make the tip kind of go to that edge where you've got it already cut down there. You can get a nice flat edge like that. Okay. And mine aren't quite as perfect as some that you'll see. Some people have been doing this a lot longer than I have, and they can get really nice, clean stamps. Mine aren't quite as clean as some people's, but they get the job done. There we go. And I'll just do it like that. There we go. That should be a nice strong stamp. This is an ASL stamp, letter L. That's where I'm at. I'm doing the whole alphabet. So this is letter L. When I'm testing out a stamp 2, I use a water-soluble ink pad. Okay. So this is just like a Avery's Carter is what it says. Carter's. I don't really know anything about it, but it's just a water-soluble pad. Okay. So I can just easily wash it off. Okay. So I'm just going to take. You can do it either way too. You can take the pad and press down on the stamp. Okay, if that's easier, or you can take the stamp and press it down on the pad. When it's raw like this, if you do that like this way, a lot of times you'll get ink on your fingers. So you can do it either way, whatever's more comfortable for you. So I'm just gonna do like this and see how that goes. And usually I'll press it down a few times to make sure it's inked up well. And you can see right there on the thumb, I cut it a little bit thin. Okay, but otherwise it looks pretty good. All right. I'm gonna take this, press it right here. And you don't need to press really hard, but just firm pressure, kind of all over the stamp to get a nice print. Pull it up like that. And there's my stamp, start to finish. That's how I do it. There's no right or wrong way, but those are just some of the few things that I found that kind of work for me. So maybe it'll help you too.